City systems refer to what we believe are the underlying root causes for the quality of life that you and I and all other citizens of cities experience in their day-to-day lives. We already have more than 400 million people living in our cities. A reasonable proportion of that population does not have access to basic quality of life. And we are expecting this population to grow to 800 million by 2050, which is just another 27 years, which is, I would say, the largest such urbanization challenge that the world will see, at least in this century. No country has become economically developed and successfully fought poverty without urbanizing well.
And no states in India have mandated a street or public space design standards for their city. Only about 20% of municipal expenditure is actually covered by property tax, which is actually the primary source revenue for cities, right? Poor human resource management, both in terms of number of staff and skills and competencies as well.
The constitution actually does not prevent the state from devolving further to the cities. The states, in some ways, are seeking refuge under some drafting error in the constitution. The future of India's city systems and India's cities critically depend on the leadership that will be shown by state governments.
Let's go. Welcome to another episode of the OoruLabs podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complain how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You'll get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability. I'm your host Sathya Sankaran. Over the past 2 decades, Janagraha has been working with citizens and governments to improve the quality of citizenship and the quality of infrastructure and services. Their flagship advocacy initiative, the Annual Survey of India's City Systems, ASICS, is a comprehensive diagnostic of the state of India's city systems. The 2023 ASICS report released recently, and we have the authors with us here, the primary author Vachana and Srikanth, of course, to give us some insights as to what this report is all about, because I found it very interesting and I thought you all should too. Welcome to the show, both of you. One of the things is, the big thing that struck me is, we've heard of cities, we've heard of governance and all these things. What is this word city systems? How do you define this city systems? How is it different from the word governance that we generally use?
Satya, city systems seeks to raise visibility for the importance of the systemic nature of governance challenges confronting our cities, which we felt about a decade ago were often overlooked. City systems refer to what we believe are the underlying root causes for the quality of life that you and I and all other citizens of cities experience in their day-to-day lives. Whether you take housing or water supply or garbage on the streets or sanitation, public transport, walkability, you name it, all of these quality of life experiences, in our view, are partially symptoms, and there are deep-rooted causes underlying that, systemic causes. And by systemic causes, we mean that they are distinct, but they're also interrelated and interdependent. So city systems refer to those underlying root causes.
And these root causes are basically not systemic in nature, as in the system can be imagined as a lot of interactive parts. It's a complex, wicked thing that we deal with on a day-to-day basis with so many dependencies. There is the citizens, there's the government, there's the businesses, and many of these things. How do you then say, is the city system only about the governance bit of it? Are there many other things that are there?
That's a great question. Our past work led us to believe that there are 4 distinct but interrelated city systems: spatial planning and design, urban capacities and resources, which refer to administrative capacities of cities comprising municipal finance, municipal staffing and performance management, and digitalization. And the third aspect relates to political leadership of the city, chiefly comprising empowerment of mayors and councils. And lastly, transparency, accountability, and citizen participation. So we define city systems as these 4 distinct but interrelated aspects.
So why did you then try to do this city system report? And I think it's been almost 10 years now, right? If you look at when was the last time? I think 2013 was the one, and now you're at 2023. What has been the evolution of your ASICS report? Why did you decide to do this?
Like we said, ASICS started in 2013, evaluating actually 11 cities. And the idea was that we have a diagnostics tool which basically evaluates the health of the governance of India's cities. So basically, the annual survey of India city systems is meant as an annual health diagnosis of the quality of laws, policies, institutions, and institutional processes which underlies the quality of life in our cities, which was what Srikanth was referring to as city systems. So the assessment is based on the city systems framework. So since 2013 to 2017, ASICS actually focused on city level analysis. And from then, what we have tried to do, in every successive edition of ASICS is that we try to improve its coverage as well as strengthening its methodology. So in 2013, we started assessing 11 cities, and by 2017, we actually, it scaled up to 23 cities. Right, and this also had, in addition to these cities, we also tried to sort of create a comparative case of India cities with global cities such as New York and London. And into 2017, we also added Johannesburg as a developing economy case as well. But in the sixth edition, which was what was released recently, ASICS 2023 edition, we've taken a little different turn. It evaluates the quality of urban laws of all 35 states and union territories, excluding Lakshadweep, because Lakshadweep does not have a statutory town today. And basically, that means it is covering 4,800 plus cities in that sense through 52 questions encompassing 100 plus parameters. So in this process, what we have done is we have analyzed 82 municipal legislations, 44 town and country planning acts, 176 allied acts, rules and notifications, 32 policy schemes and other documents. And this was the core exercise was done during the period of December 21 to December 2022. Now, in addition to this law-based assessment, what we have also done is to make the report much more relevant. We also analyzed additional data sets, about 27 additional data sets, which also checks to some extent the implementation aspects, such as the cities with active master plans, for example, or cities with active ward committees. We also try to understand the patterns of urbanization in India, like, for example, analyzing the district urbanization pattern basis Census 2011 data. We also try to analyze the CAG performance audit reports on the implementation of 74th Constitution Amendment Act of 13 states for which the reports were available during the point of assessment. So this is how ASICS has evolved, and our aspiration is that at some point that we actually scale up the analysis also, including for city level implementation aspects for the entire 4,800 plus cities in India in a phased manner.
So, but why even look at city systems and districts and things like that? What is this thing? Because I've heard India is more urban. I see that statement bold and clear in one of those things. Why do you feel the need to study urban governance at all over the macro landscape of governance itself? What is the importance of urbanization in India that you feel?
Firstly, as an organization, our mission is to transform quality of life in India's cities and towns, and we are part of a larger group of organizations, loosely refer to ourselves as Jana Group, which focuses only on cities, fixing quality of life in cities. As an organization, as we evolved from a citizen participation organization, our original proposition was to catalyze citizen participation in India's cities. And in the process of catalyzing citizen participation, circa 2003-4, we discovered the importance of larger urban governance systems in facilitating citizen participation. And thereafter, we, as a practitioner organization, through our own practical work with union, state governments, and local governments, we evolved the city systems framework. So that's with respect to our own journey as an organization on why we evolved the city systems framework and started working on ASICS, is because we realized that citizen participation is only one side of the coin. And it's important for us to also look at governance systems, which also influences citizen participation. And that led to where we are today as an organization. But the larger question of what, if I were to understand your question in a larger sense of why is it important in contemporary India for us to study urban governance, I'd say there are three perspectives. One is a quality of life perspective, which is that we already have more than 400 million people living in our cities. A reasonable proportion of that population does not have access to basic quality of life. And by quality of life, here I mean basic infrastructure and services: housing, sanitation, water supply, power supply, access to education, health, transport, and so on. And we are expecting this population to grow to 800 million by 2050, which is just another 22 years. Sorry, 27 years, which means you have to overcome the current deficit in our cities and then prepare to provide basic infrastructure and services to double this population, which is, I would say, the largest such urbanization challenge that the world will see, at least in this century. And in some ways, among democratic countries in the history of the world, no other country would have undergone this scale of urbanization at this small a time period. So that's the first perspective, a quality of life perspective. The second perspective is an economic perspective. In the history of the world, again, no country has become economically developed and successfully fought poverty without urbanizing well. So if India seeks to fulfill its aim of becoming a $10 trillion economy by a certain year, a $5 trillion economy by a certain year, but more importantly, to meet human development goals for its citizens, then it has to urbanize well. The third thing I would say is, if 50% of India's population are likely to live in our cities by 2050, and if citizens in cities have in some ways a disproportionate share of voice, then the quality of India's democracy will be determined by the quality of democracy in our cities. And governance systems are a very important component of determining the quality of democracy. So I would say it's from these three distinct but somewhat interrelated perspectives that, in our view, urbanization, urban development, and urban governance should be reckoned as among the top 2 or 3 policy priorities of India as a country.
Fair enough. I think that kind of sets the stage, because I've heard that improving India's governance in cities also gives a good framework for scaling it to other places as well. Not necessarily in the same way, but at least the learnings of what we need to fix can help us define other things as well. But what do you think are the key findings in this report? Is there like a ranking of cities, and what do you find? Which are the cities that are well governed?
The unit of analysis has not been city, it has been state. So we basically, because we were evaluating the quality of laws, right? So it's basically a reflection of state. And we did not, therefore, do a ranking of cities. But however, consistently, because this has been an assessment of governance, and we are focusing on aspect of laws, and the messaging in that sense of ASICS has generally remained consistent. So one is that our cities do not have a modern contemporary framework of spatial planning and design standards for a public utility. So, for example, 39% of state capitals, which include, say, Delhi, Bangalore, Bhopal, Dehradun, do not have active master plans. About 13 capital cities basically do not have active master plans. About only 7 states, for example, are mandated to have a 3-tiered planning process, which is to have a regional plan, a municipal plan, and a ward level plan. And no states in India have mandated a street or public space design standards for their city. So that is one. Second is weak finances, both in terms of financial sustainability and financial accountability of cities. So only about 20% of municipal expenditure is actually covered by property tax, which is actually the primary own source revenue for cities, right? Third observation would be that poor human resource management, both in terms of number of staff and skills and competencies as well as organization design and performance management. So 36% is the average vacancy in city governments, and this is in addition to the other critical skill gaps that exist as well. And only 14 out of 35 states or union territories actually mandate any kind of training or capacity building for their municipal officials. Fourth observation is that there are basically our mayors and city councils are weak, and there's severe fragmentation of governance across municipalities, parastate agencies, and state departments. So Our analysis shows that only 42% of the 74th Constitution Amendment Act has actually been implemented by states. Say only 8 states have directly elected mayors at 5 year or 10 year, and 1,400 plus cities in India actually did not have an elected mayor or council. Some even as for long as 9 years, and this even includes mega cities like Bangalore and Mumbai, which did not actually have which even today do not have an elected council. And the final observation would be that there is an absence of systematic citizen participation transparency in our cities. Like, for example, only 3 states in India are actually mandated to have public consultation while drawing up city budgets, or only 5 states actually have enacted community participation law and also have notified corresponding boards, because that's what would actually facilitate the implementation of community participation law, which basically mandates what committees and areas serve us, right? So only 5 states actually have enacted it. So these are the 5 high-level or key messaging of ASICS 2023 as well.
That's wonderful. So it's very telling that in order to rate city systems, we have to go and study the state laws. You called these as instruments of change, and there are about 10 of them that you have used, and one of them is the spatial development plans and what's going on with that. So what did you find? The thing you said is that the master plan, the three-tiered master plan, is not existing. How do you think we can get into? Let's jump into trying to understand each of these instruments of change. And I just wanted to understand, how do you look at the next steps on fixing the ability of cities to get the spatial development plans going at some level?
There are multiple issues with master plans, and they're all governed by the Town and Country Planning Act at the state level. There is a guiding document at the union level called the UDR-PFI guidelines. However, it's the State Town and Country Planning Act and the allied rules that govern master planning in cities. So there's a problem of preparation, implementation, and enforcement. And as Vachana mentioned, at 3 levels: for larger cities at the regional level, for all cities at the municipal level, and then again, ward level or neighborhood level or local area plans. These are the 3 levels at which plans need to be there, and their timelines need to be nested. Their timelines can't be haphazard and disjoint. So, for example, there could be 5-year ward level or local area plans. There could be 10-year municipal plans and 20-year regional plans, for example. But their preparation has to be timely, and they have to be implemented, and they have to be enforced. And as the name suggests, spatial development actually conveys the true import of planning for cities rather than a master plan, which as the name suggests, conveys inflexibility, rigidity, and regulation. And it's quite well known among the planning community, and neither Vachana nor I belong to the planning community. But among the planning community, it's a well-known fact that today master plans in India's cities, even if they exist, are a land use plan and are a instrument of regulation, land conversion, and so on, rather than of strategy, visioning, and planning, keeping the citizen at the center. Which is why we believe there's a need for us to reimagine town and country planning acts through the prism of spatial development plans. One of our co-founders, Swathi Ramanathan, under the aegis of the then Ministry of Urban Development, had authored a National Urban Spatial Planning and Development Guideline, which formed the basis for our assessment of the planning section under ASICS. So timely preparation, proper implementation, and proper enforcement, 3 tiers of plans, nested timelines, and sectoral plans, with transport, heritage, other network services, etc., would be some of the key features that are necessary for us to reimagine spatial development plan in our cities.
One of the other instruments was also public space. Why is that important, for you to study in all of these cities? What led you to study public space designs? But I don't know, you guys have worked on a lot of public space things, including tender shore and other things. Why is that important for a city system, and what does that what are the problems you found? Because we are living in cities we are not really proud of, and it's the quality isn't up to the mark. But then what do you think can be done?
So Sathya, in loosely put, the master plan is somewhat distant for a citizen at this point in time. But all of us walk on our streets, we drive on our roads, we drop off our kids to school, or our elderly parents or grandparents use the roads, and we also would like to visit parks, other open spaces, uh, museums, markets, food markets, meat markets, transit hubs, bus terminals, etc. So there's a variety of public spaces in our cities, and streets connect us from our homes to those public spaces. Today, the stark reality in our cities is there are no standards. There are no standards for streets or for public spaces which are mandatory, which means technically I can build a road in any way I like. I can build a market in any way I like without any standards or specifications. And the purport of a standard is minimum quality that is needed to make the space safe, inclusive, and economically vibrant and ecologically sustainable. Right? So if I were to succinctly summarize it as 3 E's: economically vibrant, environmentally sustainable, and equitable in all senses of the word, including being safe. Now, if there are no, and so the purpose of standards is not to have one size fits all, but to have basic minimum standards of quality across these 3 E's. And if they don't exist, then you won't get quality. Then your streets will not be walkable. Then there won't be road safety, either for motorists or, more importantly, for pedestrians. You won't be able to cross your roads properly. The differently abled or the elderly or children will not be able to walk on the streets at all in many cases. If there's no adequate street lighting, there's a major public safety issue. And if your streets are not walkable, how will people be encouraged to ride on buses rather than use private transport? Similarly, a lot of the urban poor depend on markets. Many of us depend on markets. And in some ways, at a larger level, our food markets represent the link between the urban and the rural. So why can't our markets be public spaces in the traditional sense like we see them in many of our developed economies, where as tourists, you would visit those markets. Whereas in our cities, you would think twice before visiting a KR market or a Russell market, which is an unfortunate situation. So these would be some of the examples. And this also extends to places like Crematoria, for example, or, the Shivaji Nagar bus terminus, Majestic. All of these places should be iconic places in Bangalore. Bangalore should feel proud about the Shivaji Nagar bus terminus, the Russell market, KR market, Majestic. These should be places that are iconic and which are maintained well. They are safe, inclusive, and represent small economies of the city themselves. So we need standards for these. So you have the tenders which are being put out are well designed. Urban designers are involved in drawing up the design standards and in the tender document which are getting placed, because that's how functionally good infrastructure gets built in a city.
So was there a gap in that? Because of course we can visually see there is a gap in that. But if let's take any city, for example, today, and even if you take any specification that is there, it is not uniformly applied. People think of public space as a set series of projects which are done in distinct things that are looking good. What is the import of this into a city system? How do we relate and say that it is because the city system is not doing this, you're not getting that? Because it's not about the project alone, because there are fancy projects now, right? You build one public space and one this and a one footpath in one corner, but the next footpath in the next road is built completely differently from the one that is right here. How do we visualize that? How do people look at this?
That's a great question. And the answer to this is standards. You need standards for roads. You need standards for markets. You need standards for mobility hubs. These standards may not be one size fits all, but there would be a set of principles that are somewhat inviolable. And those principles are accompanied by, design standards, and which can be adapted to different contexts. And they are mandatory and they are enforceable, which means you cannot float a tender that is not aligned to these standards. That will make sure that every street in the city is necessarily walkable, with continuous even footpaths, with uniform road lanes, with safe intersections and pedestrian crossings, with adequate street lighting, and so on. Standards are the answer, enforceable standards.
One of the other instruments you guys are also looking at is the constitutional amendment and the commentary on the 74th Amendment. We all know it is there. People have been told that the decentralization using the 74th constitutional amendment is there and we should use it. But there are challenges in that and there are drawbacks of that. And I have touched upon in some of those podcasts that I link about those as well. You also talked about decentralization and other things in your conversation with me. But you touched upon it in the ASICS report. What were your conclusions there, and what do you think? Of course, it's something that the government needs to do at some level. Are you amending the CAA to add more stuff, or like you said, work with what you have and try to make it good? What do you think is appropriate right now? And also tell people why the 74th Amendment is not adequate enough.
Say there are three reasons why both Constitutional Amendment Act is not adequate enough. One is that some of the provisions in 74th Amendment is actually are inherently limiting. Like, for example, if you look at Article 243W, which is about devolution of functions, the provision is with a may provision instead of a shall provision. So what happens in that such instances is that it sort of gives states to a levy to not comply with the devolution of functions as per the 12th schedule of the Constitution, which essentially enlists 18 functions which are to be devolved by states to city governments. Now, what this particular provision has also resulted in is that, for example, in states like Haryana, Jammu Kashmir, Punjab, for example, they have emulated the same may provision in their municipal legislations as well, and they have devolved all the 18 functions under the 12th schedule with a may provision instead of a shall provision. And this issue sort of repeats in other instances, even in terms of a devolution of funds as well, where the Constitution talks about devolution of taxation and other sources to city governments. Another issue would, which we could call out is Article 243S, where there's a provision on the constitution of wards committee, which is basically, instead of a single ward committee a ward committee for every ward, for each ward, it's a provision which allows to have a single committee of citizens for multiple wards. So this has resulted in is that there are 10 states today which actually provides for wards committee structure. And this sort of is taking away the spirit of ward committee and the idea that ward committee was supposed to bring governance closer to people. And this sort of plays out quite well in case of a city like Mumbai, for example, which as per census has a biggest ward of about 7.6 lakh population. And the average size of wards in Mumbai is close to about 1.28 lakhs, right? And Mumbai has 227 wards, of which they're divided into 16 administrative ward committees, which means each ward committee consists of 8 to 20 electoral wards. So roughly, a ward committee is representing about 10 odd lakh citizens, right? So this really dilutes the intent of ward committee platform itself. So that's one. So some of the provisions are therefore inherently limiting. Second, 74th CA indeed was quite appropriate, like you were also pointing out. It was quite appropriate when it was enacted in 1993, but time has passed, and it does not reflect contemporary realities and aspirations of 21st century India. So, it does not provide for an empowered mayor for the city with an executive authority who's actually responsible as a single point of political accountability for cities. There's no provisions for metropolitan governance framework, taking the provision beyond the current provision for Metropolitan Planning Committee, for example, the issues of city parastatals. So there are it does not, as of today, does not reflect the current realities and challenges our cities are facing. And a very fundamental issue which we often forget when we talk about 74th Constitutional Amendment Act is that it did not recognize city governments as a distinct tier of government. It does recognize city governments to be institutions of self-government, but it is not a distinct tier of government, but it is a subsidiary, like a sub-tier of state governments, which is also a problem, right? So these we could broadly say these are the three issues with 74th Amendment.
And this is something that goes back to how the states need to do something, but this is something they can't do. You can't get over a constitutionally written, badly written point. But if there's something that they can do, let's talk about MPC versus city governments and things like that. There was, at least in Karnataka, I know of an example of in Bengaluru where the Metropolitan Planning Committee was set up. And there are conflicts in how it plays in the politics itself. There is a Bengaluru development minister, then there is DTCP, then there are planning authority, local planning areas. Everybody is fighting with each other to gain control over the real estate in this space, right? So while we have all these amendments, how do you look at city systems versus districts versus planning areas? How are these? Are they superimposed with each other? So the MPC area versus a is that also a part of a city system, a metropolitan region? Is that how you look at it? Because I saw one blurb in your whole report which talked about district collectors. I never even pay attention to district collectors. I don't think they exist. It's probably for a village, is what I thought. But what is the role they have played in some of these cities? How do you look at the spatial big thing? Because for us, city means Bengaluru, Mumbai, or whatever else. We don't think of regions. How do you look at it as a city system? Do they play with each other? How do they interact?
So Satya, I'll pick up. There are four elements I could discern from your
Okay.
question. One is role of the state. The other is the MPC. The design of the MPC. The third is a metropolitan government, and fourth is district.
Yeah.
So I'll take the first two, and I'll spend very little time on it and flip it to Vachana for the remaining two, which are more substantive parts of the conversation. So on the first one, the Constitution actually does not prevent the state from devolving further to the cities. The states, in some ways, are seeking refuge under some drafting error in the Constitution. So I would say, and there is no need for a constitutional provision that empowers states to devolve, because local governments are a state subject. Local governments are a state subject. It's in the interest of the state's economic development, of the state's equity objectives, of the state's environment objectives, for them to think about city systems and usher in reforms. So the constitutional amendment is a necessary but not sufficient condition. In some ways, I would argue, even if it doesn't happen, states are duly empowered to effect city systems reforms. I would go so far as to say that the future of India's city systems and India's cities critically depend on the leadership that will be shown by state governments. There are only two things that I believe union governments bring to the table. One is, in the current fiscal architecture, it so happens that union governments still control substantial financial resources, and therefore they will be able to incentivize some of these reforms. Secondly, given that traditionally union governments have played a thought leadership role in introducing new ideas, it is likely that if the union government introduces new ideas, there's greater legitimacy and credibility for them. But the fact remains that in many cases, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years, state governments have taken a lead even in thought leadership. So I would say it's totally up to state governments to take leadership. The second, on metropolitan planning committees, I think they are poor by design. What we need really are metropolitan governments for the larger cities. I think we're just wasting time emphasizing too much on MPCs because they do not have executive authority. By design in the Constitution, they do not possess executive authority. They just forward the plans for consideration of the state governments. What we need are really metropolitan governments. For the two more important components of metropolitan governments and districts, I would request Vachana to weigh in.
Totally agree with what Srikanth said, because there is a constitutional design issue in the way metropolitan planning committees has been basically envisioned. So by design, it's supposed to be just a planning body and not a metropolitan governance institution. So its role is completely limited to the preparation of a draft development plan for the metropolitan area, which they're supposed to forward to the state government, and there is zero executive power. Right, so there is definitely an urgent need to reimagine the roles and powers of MPCs if we have to achieve the goal of integrated metropolitan planning and governance. And we have, as we speak today, we have 53 million plus cities, essentially urban agglomeration, which host about 44% of India's population, right? And they're sort of haphazardly governed by 200 plus odd city governments and several other agencies, state departments, and even panchayats as well. So there is like an absolute absence of coordinated approach to metropolitan governance and agglomeration economies, and there is also an economic implication to it because at the end of the day, agglomeration economy sort of has a huge impact on the economic productivity of India. Right? There is a need for us to therefore look at some of the global metropolitan models. Like if you look at Tokyo, there's a metropolitan city government which is basically headed by a directly elected, empowered mayor. So that is how Tokyo metropolitan government is. A similar structure is followed in Greater London Authority. And there are also certain recent experiments like the combined authority model in other cities of the United Kingdom. So we need to probably look at these kinds of different global models, inform, and let's try to sort of understand and be informed by the institutional design from these global models and see what is suited to the context of every state and city. So that is quite important. I think a second question was about the role of district collectors, right?
I did see that bubble and I was interested because as a unit of governance, we don't think about the district. And I was just curious to see that. And in some places, it also mentioned that the district collector can override some financial decisions. So I was just curious to bring that up because it was interesting to me. So what's the role of a district? That's what these regions are defined so nebulously. There's a whole regional thing, and then there's a city which you look at the wards and things, and then there's the district in between. There's so many various levels of governance that I'm kind of confused when we say city systems. What are we referring to? That's one of the things that comes up, right?
So just to clarify that, Satya, city systems are agnostic to administrative boundaries.
Hmm.
They are agnostic to administrative boundaries, which could change over time. So, in fact, as part of city systems, we are bringing in the spatial element very strongly, and by emphasizing on spatial development plans, by emphasizing on metropolitan government, we are actually saying we need to take a place-based approach to governance.
District collectors actually play a lot more important role in case of smaller cities, not so much perhaps as of larger cities, but they play a very important role across city governments, across smaller city governments, municipalities, and town panchayats. And these are actually quite recognized in the municipal legislations as well. Like they undertake functions around municipal elections, meeting proceedings. In the planning of these cities, in the district planning committees actually, which applies to non-metropolitan areas. In managing of finances, etc. So so these are the key. Some of the, broadly speaking, some of the key areas that district collectors engage in, and they actually hold specifically emergency powers, right? In case of a disaster, or so there's. So even we actually saw that quite coming alive in during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic, where actually all of these integrated command centers to manage the situation was headed by district collector, and basically it's a district collector who sort of coordinates all the efforts um, in also collaborating with the local bodies within a district.
Before we get into the finance and the resourcing part, I just wanted to ask about this whole. We do like the ward committee, not the wards committee, but if you do scale to that level of granularity, is it even possible to govern at that level? Let me ask it this way: does the city governments currently have the capacity to handle this many ward committees and coordinate them? You guys have been doing participatory budgeting and things like that. Are they even organized enough? And even if you do say do it, do they have the capability to do it? Will it succeed the way we are placed right now, or is it too soon? What is the situation on?
So, my view, it's a great question to link state capacities with ward committees, simply in terms of number of people needed and the skills and competencies needed to steward these meetings, synthesize the action items, and inform the council of these requests from people, and then allocate resources and be accountable back to the ward committee is a non-trivial chain of activities. And prima facie, you're right. I don't believe that prima facie, the skills and competencies needed, the staffing that is needed, the state capacity overall that is needed to manage so many ward committees month on month, prima facie is not available. However, we believe that by focusing on ward committees and backfilling these capacities, the state and the city administration would stand to in fact gain, because they will have a very strong feedback loop or a signaling system on how to prioritize the human resource bandwidth and the financial bandwidth of the city and target them towards where they are most needed and where they will best fulfill the aspirations of the citizens. So you're right. If you say, today, do we have the capacities? Today, we don't have the capacities. But should we be building those capacities as a priority? The answer is yes. We also feel that probably as a country, we've not been imaginative in leveraging our deep skills in digitalization and digital technology well enough in this particular area. Today, we have the required internet bandwidth. We do have widespread mobile internet and mobile penetration in our cities to be able to do digital citizen participation, which requires lesser resources of the government. So we've not been imaginative enough in this area.
That's a very interesting take. The capacity building could be extended with digital means, and if where there is a will, we can find a way. While that's an interesting thing, let's jump into the elephant in the room, which is the finance piece. We've talked at length. I'll link your podcast on this one, which I think was a super hit because it led more people to understand finance and get it demystified. 20% property tax, you hinted at that. It's just not enough. What are your recommendations in this? Obviously, money is a challenge for the cities. Let's summarize while people can watch the long form. What's your short form in this?
So one, don't give larger cities any free money. The larger cities have large economies that they can leverage. So give them only performance-based funding, and that performance-based funding should be sizable, but should be linked to citizen outcomes. It should be linked to clean air. It should be linked to average travel time. It should be linked to getting investments and creating jobs. It should be linked to housing for the poor, better human development outcomes for the poor, but they should be a sizable wallet. And this I say both particularly for the union government and to a lesser extent for the state governments as well. I think they deserve to leverage their own economies, the potential of their economies, and raise their own resources. Second, however, for the smaller cities, give them untied grants, because today they are actually somewhat like cost centers. They may not have the potential to generate adequate own revenues to provide basic infrastructure and services to their citizens. Whereas today, the architecture of our central schemes and missions is largely one size. I don't believe Bangalore should be receiving funds from Swachh Bharat Mission because it's a drop in the ocean for Bangalore. So that's one recommendation. Don't treat large cities, mid-sized cities, and small cities in the same way when it comes to funding mechanisms. The second thing I want to say is, therefore, for the smaller cities, you need to give them predictable fiscal transfers in terms of timing and quantum. They need to know how much money they will receive in which month of the year for a 5-year period. So they're able to plan their budgets and their expenditure plans accordingly. I would also say that buoyant revenue streams like GST, stamp duties and registration charges, and motor vehicle registration charges need a better architecture to find pathways to cities. They are very large sources of revenue for states, but a share of GST, a share of stamp duties and registration charges, a share of motor vehicle registration charges. And I'm calling these out because I think motor vehicles and properties are key drivers of infrastructure in a city. Congestion, roads. The moment you look at number of households, number of properties, then that drives several other expenditure obligations for city corporations and city administrations. Therefore, looking at these buoyant sources of revenues. The two other things I would add. One is land and property of the city has to be leveraged much better to access municipal borrowings. Today, India's cities are hugely under leveraged. They are not utilizing their land assets and property assets to raise more resources to invest in infrastructure and services, because they don't have an inventory of public lands. They are not valuing those public lands at market rates.
Hmm.
And they don't have a shelf of projects which can be put out to attract funding, a shelf of investable, bankable projects. Today, if you ask the BBMP, they will not have a bank of projects. BBMP should be able to raise 1 lakh crores over 5 years from the market. If Bangalore can't do it, which city in the world can do it?
Absolutely.
And lastly, I would say digital public finance management systems to give visibility of the journey of the rupee from source to its destination of citizen out. Why is it that in the BBMP, as citizens of Bangalore, you and I are not able to see the journey of every rupee
Hmm.
from its inception, whether as property tax or as grants from the state government or as grants from finance commissions of the union government, to various stages of procurement, tendering, etc., and to project execution and completion, and then see the work. In the 21st century, this should be real-time data that is available in an easily consumable. So I would say these are the big ideas that I would put on the table.
Yeah, especially for finance. But that also brings me to the inability to leverage tech, whether for deliberate purpose or not. I don't know what they have to hide, but this does bring in a little bit of transparency and many other things. You did talk about auditing a lot better so that you can have better controls. They don't have enough of a credit rating to raise some of the loans that they need. It obviously goes back to how they're leveraging the assets. But one thread that we find in most of these that we went through is that the government needs to do so many things, right? And it comes back to the last thing that we're looking at, the 36% vacancy with existing structure of hiring, which seems to be there is a lot more lower end staffing than higher end staffing. It brings a lot of question. This comes down to the bottom of it. Some people will say government is inefficient. There are too many people. I really don't buy it. I had written it once that we are actually quite understaffed, but the quality of the staffing also matters. Can they even hire fast enough? Who even wants to work there? If you want to hire tech workers to build all the digital systems or even maintain them, the amount of payment that they have to give, they cannot afford it. How do you look at procuring digital, trying digital versus the current system, how they look at all of these things and the staffing itself? What were your findings across cities in the ASICS report?
So basically, it's a good start that there are like what we saw was that about 24 out of 35 states actually have municipal cadres in India. But it's a problem that Srikanth was indicating that the cadre and recruitment rules most of the time only mention like the bare minimum qualifications, and it often does not include managerial or behavioral competencies. Right, and for example, Odisha, which actually has Odisha is one of the states which actually has relatively good cadre and recruitment rules. But when it comes to, say, the post of, say, chief finance officer of the city, must have completed like a CA or ICA or CWA from ICWAI. The recruitment rules would not mention the managerial or behavioral competencies required for that particular position. And this is quite different if you look at the rules or the job descriptions employed even by like a city like Johannesburg. There's a lot more. The job descriptions are far more detailed. For example, in Joburg, the position of, say, executive director in economic development, it mentions technical requirements such as sector specific experiences in economic development. There should also be a comprehensive understanding of local government, its policy frameworks. It's actually like a 2-page long document which actually details every single aspect of competency, skills, and expectations from that role, which is completely absent in the CNR rules. It also does not mandate about learning and the systematic learning and capacity development of municipal officials either. So even in municipal legislations, like I was mentioning earlier, only 14 states mandate some kind of training for officials. Right? It is not even talking most often about the frequency at which the training should happen. Right. So and then there is an added if we analyze the CAG performance audit reports on the implementation of 74CA, what we also found was that basically there are only 5 states in India which actually have a training institute for building like staff capacity. Basically. Like there's some training institute to build capacities of municipal officials. So these are basically broadly the issues around cadre and recruitment rules.
Yeah.
So
What is municipal cadre? Is that like a stream that you are envisioning?
So municipal cadre is basically a cadre specifically for municipal administrative services, which would also have sub cadre. Say, for example, municipal engineering service, municipal financial service, municipal environment service. And some of the good examples we could say in Indian context would be Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, which have actually sort of revisited their other uniform or general cadre and recruitment rules to create specific municipal cadre with the sub cadre. So there's better specialization also being built.
So, Satya, I'm really glad that you mentioned about understaffing in our city governments, and it's somewhat chronic, in fact. So, we like to give the extreme example of comparing the New York City government with Bangalore. Both New York and Bangalore had somewhat similar population in 2011. And the New York City government has staff count of more than 400,000 people. Of course, it's true that unlike the BBMP, they also cover housing, education, metro transport, policing, and so on. But compare that to less than 30,000 in BBMP. Even if you add the staff of BMRCL, of BWSSB, of Bangalore Traffic Police, of Bangalore City Police, of PDA, and so on, you would still fall far below the staffing levels. And we are talking about a city that is already very well developed. So I'm not making a case to say we need to do that level of staffing in our cities, because we may not have the fiscal bandwidth, and we may be able to do the job more efficiently using technology and so on. But all I'm saying is that shows the extent of understaffing in cities. And you also rightly pointed out that most of the staffing is also in group C or grade C or grade D levels rather than at senior levels. In my view, the solution for this, given the tight fiscal situation and the difficulty in recruitment that you alluded to, there are issues like the state service commissions, etc., are not easy to navigate. It's not easy to hire people in our cities, and there is a fiscal constraint. So we are actually listing municipal shared service centers as a lever for change or as an instrument of change. And we are essentially saying for citizen services, you can adopt a Passport Seva Kendra model. The Bangalore one tried to do, not as extensively. Passport Seva Kendras and VFS are doing it for very sensitive areas like passports and visas. There's no reason why municipal services cannot be covered through a similar model with a very robust technology and outsourced. Or it can even be done within a specialized entity within the city government or the state government. Similarly, we are saying for field services like gardeners for parks, or electricians for street lights, or line people for water supply, or tax collectors, sanitation engineers, etc. There's no reason why you can't adopt an urban company model where you can empanel high quality gardeners, high quality engineers, high quality electricians, etc., and use them using mobile apps, allocate them dynamically for particular jobs, for particular services with online rating, etc. Similarly, for back office, traditional back office services like payroll management, vendor payments, accounting, etc. Why does BWSSB need a finance department, and BBMP need a finance department, and BDA need a finance department? Why can't we have a single Bangalore city shared services where we have much greater efficiencies in back office services, which can be bunched up, standardized, and done? And the idea here is not to centralize, but is to drive efficiencies. The final authority should remain with the city government, with the mayor. but it's possible for us to be a lot more efficient in the manner in which we do it. And the objective should be one or more of the following three. One, better citizen service levels. Two, lesser costs. Three, more revenues.
Mm.
One or more of these three objectives should be fulfilled, but through municipal shared services. And for larger cities, you may need a city level operation like we spoke about for Bangalore. But for smaller cities, it can be at a district level or at a cluster level, which makes sense for that particular context. There'll be huge savings that arise out of it. There'll be greater efficiencies in terms of citizen service levels and in terms of revenue collections. So we have to be far more innovative. The sad part here is the innovations we are seeing in the private sector are not traveling a few kilometers to the town hall and getting adopted, right? So the global delivery centers of the big four accounting firms are filing tax returns and regulatory returns of companies in the US and UK in Bangalore. Similarly, an Amazon delivery in the US is getting billed in Hyderabad. But our city governments are not able to adopt those models and efficiencies. So we need to find a way to connect them.
I think that's a beautiful point. Is the Passport Seva Kendra example was amazing. You can extend if you have a very good contract management system. If you have a flawed contract management system, you'll always be afraid of being swindled left, right, and center. The program management officers understanding how to cross leverage efficiencies. It is typically it's punt the ball to someone else. Increasingly, some are looking to hire, but then there is this whole they are not in the government, so they may be outsiders. So how do we work with them? Those insecurities again come because you don't write down what you want from them and how you want it evaluated. What are the SLAs? How will you measure? There's a lot of that capacity that is lacking. Maybe that gives them the confidence to say, I know how to manage when somebody comes from outside. Do you see any movement in anywhere to extend? Because this is, I think, the bottom of the bottom line problem in the government being able to efficiently render any services is that I will only do everything, but I can't do anything, so I will not do anything. Right? I can only do so much, but I only have to do it. Let's bring it all together now. The ASICS report. Let's focus back on the entire 10 things that we have gone through, the instruments of change. How do you see this leading to the next level of change? How do you think people can dip into it? How do you think governments can dip into this report? How do people read this and make their conclusions? What do you think others can do? Maybe I'll read it and then take up and say, let me go do HR or contract management for the government. Does it provide those kind of opportunities?
That's a beautiful idea. Frankly, I haven't thought about it that deeply. Currently, it is a bit hard to consume the ASICS report. So we should look at demystifying it, making it simpler, and perhaps also looking at your excellent idea of seeing how to make it a tool that is more collaborative. How do you make sure that you're able to put out certain ideas and then say, okay, if there are 5-10 people who are willing to work on it, then we create small groups of people that are able to work on one or more of these ideas. That I think is an excellent idea. And we should perhaps develop it. But in taking a slightly narrower view, I would say the idea is really to prioritize among these 10. Look at the ones that are slightly more catalytic and advocate for their adoption and implementation by state governments. That would be our priority at this stage. But I think your idea actually is brilliant, and love to discuss offline on how to develop that particular idea of creating a community of practitioners around these 10 ideas.
What do you think, Vachana, would be things that the city system, which ones do you think can be taken up? Like Srikanth was saying, if some of these can be sped up faster, which ones would you pick of these? I'm sure they may not be the same for all cities, but if you took maybe 2 tiers of cities and said these are the faster ones they can look at, I'm sure they're not going to chase the 74th CAA as the first one. But what do you think?
Street and public space design standards, the finance pieces, which is about taxation, predictable transfers, borrowings, and digital public finance management, and the municipal shared services as well, which I think would be more catalytic in nature, because others are, like you rightly said about aspects of 74th Constitutional Amendment, that it would be a far more long journey. So, the ones I just said, filtering out would be the ones that got me out personally.
Super. And thank you guys for coming on the show and helping me understand and helping the viewers understand what this ASIC report is. It's quite interesting. You kept it going for so long and there's so much rich information in there. I wish we could put more thought into getting some of these things actionable and people are using it and people are consuming it. I'll put the link to the report in the show notes so they can see. Again, thanks for shining the light on this thing and hope this goes somewhere and I'll take up your offer. Let's go and talk about what else we can do with this thing and pick up on those threads. Thank you very much for coming on the show. See you all next week. Bye bye.